We're going to be talking about women in the paramedic and firefighting professions and mental health with today's guest, Christy Warren, whose first book, Flashpoint, A Firefighter's Journey Through PTSD, is set to be released next month. Christy Warren is a retired fire captain from the Berkeley Fire Department in California. She has 25 years of service as a professional paramedic, and within that 25 years, 18 years as a professional firefighter/paramedic. After being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress in 2014, Christy retired from the fire service. Since then, she's become a triathlete, completed the Escape from Alcatraz swim, not one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 times, and earned a bachelor's degree in business from Washington State University. She's a volunteer peer at the West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat and hosts the podcast, The Firefighter Deconstructed. She lives in Pleasant Hill, California with her wife, Lisa, and dog, Harriet. Christy Warren, welcome to Next Steps Forward.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. I really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate your time. And thank you for your service. I know 25 years is a lot, and we're digging into that a bit, but I just want to thank you here in advance of the show. So you were a paramedic and then a firefighter paramedic. Had you always wanted to be an EMT or a firefighter, and how'd you become an EMT?
Well, actually, I wanted to become a doctor, and I was going to school at UC Davis right out of high school and taking pre-med classes. And, the first couple of years are like microbiology and chemistry and physics and, these kind of boring classes that have nothing to do with being a doctor, at least in my eyes. And I saw there was an EMT class. I just kind of randomly saw it on a board and I'm like, oh, I'll do that. That'll be fun and get my hands on something. And so I started taking this EMT class and I finished the class and I needed something to do for the summer. And I saw in a newspaper they're hiring EMTs in Vallejo, California. And so I was like, that sounds like fun. I get to work on an ambulance. That would be actually incredible. So I applied and I got the job and I started working as an EMT and then did that for a little while and then just fell in love with it and went to paramedic school and became a paramedic. And then decided that this would be just way better than being a doctor and being in a hospital all day and looking at lab results. And it's like, this is just way more exciting. And so I pretty much dropped out of school to work full time as a medic. And I just fell in love with it. Just fell in love with the whole first responder world.
And as a follow-up to that, from a paramedic, what inspired you to become a firefighter? Why'd you make that career move?
Well, we run calls obviously with the fire department because, when you dial 911, the fire department, when you're looking for an ambulance, the fire department comes also. And so I saw what they did and watched them fight a lot of fire and extricate people out of cars and thought like that looks even more amazing than being a paramedic. I've always been athletic and played sports and really liked a good hard physical challenge. And I just was like, I got to do that too. And you can be a paramedic and be a firefighter. And so I started testing for fire departments and then got hired and just, absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it.
The training process for becoming a firefighter is obviously very rigorous, to say the least. Did you have any particular challenges with it?
The biggest challenge I had was I am small. I'm 5'6". I'm like 150 pounds. And I had to work really hard in the weight room to be strong enough to do the job. I always swore I'd never be the weak link in the chain. I didn't want anybody having to pick up my slack at all. Obviously a big, giant, strong dude is going to be stronger than me no matter what I do. But also being small, I had my advantages too, because I fit into all the small little crevices and cracks. And I spent a lot of time in attics and crawl spaces and windows. And so the physical challenge was hard. And then I actually really relished that. That was, probably the hardest part. I mean, there's all kinds of hard parts, to it, but yeah, it was all a good challenge.
And then what eventually compelled you to join specifically the Berkeley Fire Department?
Well, I really like working in kind of the inner city environment. I like being really busy. Berkeley was a really busy department. They were also known for having a very strong EMS program. So, I knew the paramedics would be strong over there. I really like the size of the department. There's 7 stations, about 140,000 people, including the UC Berkeley campus. They're small. The city's small itself. It's only 10 square miles, but it's very, very densely populated. It's like the second most densely populated city, west of the Mississippi. They have a lot of old construction, which means not a lot of fire protection in place. So they did fight a lot of fire. And old construction, I mean, I know this now, I don't really know it then, but old construction is a lot safer to fight fire than new construction. Like you get what we call really good fires that aren't quite as dangerous as, newer construction with all the synthetic everything that burns us so much hotter and faster. Berkeley was really in the size that I wanted to. I really didn't want to go work for a gigantic department and get lost in it. But this one was big enough and busy enough that I got to stay really busy, and there's so many target hazards too in Berkeley. We have so much. We have the campus, and we have the hills, and we have a high pressure jet fuel line that runs right through the east end of the city. And I mean, it just goes on and on, big houses, little houses, poor socioeconomic area, very wealthy area. It just kind of had everything, so you could kind of go find whatever you really like to do.
You just touched on the hills. I know that there are specific wildland fire departments, but is that something that you would help out with as well?
Yeah, we rarely got grass fires actually because the fog came in so much. And so we didn't get very much. And most of the city of Berkeley is actually, concrete and asphalt, but we do interface with a pretty heavy duty wildland area. So the threat was always there. And so we had to be really good at it, even though we didn't do it very often, which is kind of hard to do. But, we had the big Berkeley, Oakland Hills fire back in 91, that just burned just a tremendous amount of area. And we had that wildland interface. So we always had to be good at it.
And it must depend on the community and the fire department, but describe your typical day as a firefighter and how your tasks and responsibilities changed as you were promoted.
So a typical day, our shift change is officially at 8, but I would always get there about 7:15 because after you've been on duty for 24, 48 out, 72 hours, there's really nothing worse than getting a call at 7:45 and not getting to go home at 8 o'clock. And then you're stuck until, the call's done, which can be 9 o'clock. So most people typically get to work early so we can relieve somebody if they get that late call. You get to work and change into your uniform and kind of sit down and with your crew and talk about what we're going to do for the day. And then we check out the rigs. Everybody kind of has different duties. A firefighter they do like typically the house cleaning and clean toilets and all that kind of stuff. And then the driver, the apparatus operator, a lot of departments call them engineers. They check out the rig and all the tools and make sure everything is ready to go. And then the captain, might have a meeting, might have a bunch of paperwork to do, emails to answer, kind of more administrative stuff. And then, plan for doing training, plan a training for the day, that kind of stuff. And then I would always step in and help, especially the firefighter, clean the house and do whatever needed to be done. Sometimes we got to work and headed off to training right away for a couple hours to go down to the drill tower and just training. And then we run calls interspersed there. Obviously, Berkeley was great because it was really busy. We were a very busy department. 4 o'clock, it's usually workout time. We'd work out, exercise, eat dinner. Some stations eat together. Some stations kind of eat on their own. The smaller stations where there's just one engine and 3 people, a lot of times they'll just eat on their own. But the bigger houses, which was what I preferred, we always sat down and ate together. Somebody was the cook for the day. And then after that, it was like free time. And you just do whatever you want, watch TV, go to bed, do whatever needs to be done. But like I said, there's always lots of call running in there. And then the stations that I worked at particularly ran a lot of calls at night. So we were up all night.
You've mentioned several times how much you love being a firefighter. What do you like most about being a firefighter?
Oh, so much. I love running calls. I loved that clarity that I felt especially when we were at a fire or, critical call or, like a big extrication, just everything in the world just goes away. And it's just like a clarity, and it's the clarity that I experienced. And I think a lot of people do. It's kind of like being in the zone or the flow state or whatever you want to call it. It's like addicting. They will call us adrenaline junkies, and I hear that word a lot. And it's true, because you get addicted to it. But it's not just the adrenaline. It's just, I think it's the clarity that is brought in that moment, and the rest of the world just melts away. So I really, really love running calls. Yeah, I went crazy at a slower station, but, and I also missed, the camaraderie. We were really like a family, where we fought like a family, and, we had disagreements, and, you're connected to the hip with these people for 24, 48 hours. And even if you were working with somebody that you really didn't particularly care for, it was like we still had each other's back, and we still had a common goal and a common purpose. And it was kind of like, even if people talk about, even if things are shitty at home, they could always go to work and find somewhere they belong, and that they're needed and they're a part of. And I really miss that a lot too.
And the flip side of that, what do you like least about being a firefighter, if anything?
Probably not getting any sleep. I really enjoyed, I loved running calls at night if they were good calls, like if they were legitimate needed calls. But, not getting any sleep really, really wears on you. People say, oh, your schedule's so great. You work 2 days on and then you get 4 days off. And it's like, well, yeah, the first 2 days you really walk around like a zombie, and you just, feel horrible. And just think of a night where you were up, where you didn't really go to bed, or you only got an hour of sleep, and then how well you function the next day. And then now do that over and over and over and over for 25 years or whatever. And it really messes with you. And so the lack of sleep is, I think, the part. I don't sleep incredibly amazing right now, but yeah, I think that's the part that I definitely missed the least, or didn't like the most, however you want to say it.
I might be jumping ahead a little bit here, but just sticking with the part about sleep, especially post-COVID, we read more and more studies about how important sleep is to mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And we know how strong first responders need to be, both physically and mentally, given all the challenges you face and you see, again, personally and professionally. How do you deal with some of those things with that lack of sleep that you had, in terms of being able to keep your head on straight and focus on the job and what had to be done?
I think you just did it. You just did it because you had to do it. I remember somebody saying to me, like, I don't know how you, when you get woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning and have to go run a call, like, I don't know how you get up. And it's like, you have to. I think it's almost like, I don't have kids, but I think it's similar to a parent and their kids. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, you hear your kid throwing up all over the place. You have to get up, or your kid's getting up for anything. You have to get up. You just have to do it. So I think, that's one way, and you just keep moving forward. And I think it definitely adds up over time. And sleep is so important for your mental health, and that, your brain, when your sleep is when your brain heals, is when your brain like kind of cleans itself out. And when you don't get a chance to do that on a regular basis, just kind of in normal life, it's detrimental. And then when you have been on like horrific calls and seen the horrible things that we see, and your brain doesn't get a chance to clean itself out, it is, I think, when it becomes really detrimental. And, PTSD is not, like emotionally like, oh, I just can't handle it anymore. It's like, it's actually a physiological injury to your brain. Your brain changes shape. It changes the kind of chemicals it makes. Your like amygdala enlarges and is on like just rapid fire, which is your kind of your fear center. It's just on rapid fire all the time. And it's because it's been injured by all the trauma that it sees, and it's never had a chance to really kind of clean itself up and reset. And so, I think we just keep going until our brain just can't, take it anymore. And for me, when I got my PTSD, is it really started hitting me when I moved from a really busy station that was up all night, pretty much every single night, to a really slow station. I almost liken it to like I got off the treadmill and things started to settle in. It's like, if you have an injured knee or foot or hip or anything and you're running on it, eventually that pain, unless it's really bad, that pain a lot of times will go away. Like you can just keep plowing through it because of endorphins and all that kind of crap. But then soon as you stop, like, and then the next day it hurts like hell. And I really think that's what happened to me is I got off the treadmill and things slowed down. And then like it just started hitting me.
You touched earlier about, the typical day, and I put air quotes around that because I don't think there's really such a thing as a typical day for a first responder.
No, yeah.
You responded to a lot of emergencies over 25 years. Was there a particular type of call or some specific incidents that were most difficult for you?
Well, kids are always really tough. We use humor and kind of rationalization to get through a lot of stuff. And it's pretty dark humor. And I think a lot of people be horrified by, some of the things that gets thrown around at the dinner table for us. But it's like, that's one way we cope, and then rationalizing it. I know there's a better word for it, but like you said, take a drunk driver who crashes into a tree, and is severely injured. You say, well, they shouldn't have been drinking, or somebody wasn't wearing their seatbelt, gets ejected through the window or whatever. It's like, well, if they were wearing their seatbelt, they'd be fine. And so it's a kind of a way of putting the onus back on them and the responsibility on them. So it's taken off of us and we can just kind of move on. Like, well, this is, kind of their own fault. But when stuff happens to kids, you can't do that. You can't use humor. We don't cross that line. And then, kids don't really take part in their own demise. It's like kids just do what kids do. And it's usually the adults that are around them that, that things can happen. And then things happen so fast. I mean, there's a million incredible parents out there whose kids have been severely injured because the parent turned around for 2 seconds to do something. And the kid, I mean, they just move so fast. And so yeah, the kids are really, really difficult. And then looking back to my whole PTS journey, the calls that really kind of haunted me were the calls where I felt helpless and where I couldn't do anything, or I couldn't, make a difference no matter how hard I tried. Those were the calls too that were really difficult.
When you and I first spoke, I mentioned someone who's become a good friend of mine who's been a firefighter for 17 years. And it's now been about 2 months ago where was on a call and found a dead baby. And that just hit him, which I can't imagine how it could not. And then he didn't feel right for a couple of days. Thankfully, his wife is a nurse. She said, "Are you okay?" He's like, "Yeah, you know what? I want to get checked out." Went, had himself tested, whatever that involves or whatever that is. And then he actually took 30 days off from the fire department. And he's just sort of thinking about what his next steps are, whether it is as a firefighter or something else. And so my wife and I have 3 kids. I just can't imagine a call like that, let alone the dozens of calls you probably saw, if not more, over your 25 years. And to that point, obviously the job is very demanding. You mentioned you work 24-hour shifts for several days in a row. How do you prioritize family, friends, and your off-duty life so that you had a healthy balance?
That's a really hard one. And it's a hard one for a lot of people. I'd get off of a 48-hour shift and, the guys were like, "Oh, come with us. We're going to go do this." And I felt so torn. It was like, I wanted to go be a part of that, but I'm like, I just spent 48 hours with you guys. I need to go home and spend time with my family. And it's so hard to not, it's just really hard. It's really hard to find that balance. And, there's a fire department family and then there's your family. And, it's really, a lot of people struggle with it and some people do it better than others. And you just have to kind of really find your priority and, and like you say, and find that balance. I think for me, I was able to see, like, I just spent 2 days with you guys. Like, I love you, but I really don't want to spend any more time with you guys. I want to go home and see my family and be at home. And, so it was a hard thing to do. I felt very torn. You felt really, really torn. The whole fear of missing out was a big one too. All the guys are going away for whatever. And, but yeah, my family was really important to me. And, when you retire or you step down, they fill you in with somebody else in a heartbeat. And, you're with your family forever. And so it's really important to realize that early on.
I think you just summed up with the beginning of that statements. I love you guys, but ...
Right.
Yep. No, that's perfect. Right. So you mentioned about retiring. You retired as a captain, so you're obviously promoted to the ranks during your career. What were your greatest strengths that helped you receive those promotions? And the flip side of that, what were your weaknesses as a professional firefighter, and how did you overcome them or compensate for them?
My weaknesses were for sure that I was really hard on everybody. I was pretty hard on myself. I had this feeling that I had to be perfect or I was nothing. I had to be the best or I was nothing. So I was very competitive, and I was just really hard on other people. If I didn't think they were moving fast enough or thinking things through well enough, or, were missing a basic skill, I would tended to be hard on them instead of, just like helping them, through it. I remember it took me a long time to realize, but, like a friend of mine that I worked with, I was complaining as a paramedic, as I felt like everybody's so slow, like they're moving so slow. And I thought that was a fault of all of theirs. And she said, well, maybe you're just really fast. And it's like, I never saw any value in myself. I always thought I was kind of crappy and lame. And so I never could see that maybe I was good at this and other people were a little bit slower at it, instead of thinking that there was something wrong with them. If that makes, I don't know if I'm making any sense at all, but I was very hard on people. That would definitely be my weakness. I expected a lot out of everybody. I expected everybody to kind of care as much as I did and have just certain strengths. And, it took me a while to realize that, everybody, almost like me being small was a strength in itself, that they had somebody to go through the small windows and crawl, in the attics and crawl in the crawl spaces. And instead of only big, 6 foot tall, strong dudes being, worthy in the fire service. That was definitely my hardest time, I think, of my biggest weakness. I think my greatest strength was that I cared a lot. I wanted things to be done, as best as we could do them. I wasn't afraid to speak up. And I mean, I'm sure I spoke up too much, but, and I really cared about my crew, and I really cared about the people I worked with, even though I don't think I sounded like it. I really did. Like I, just do what I can for everybody. But yeah, it was, you learn a lot over all those years, and, it's different being in a leadership position in the sense that you feel like you need to be the stronger, even stronger than everybody. And, they say it can be lonely at the top just because you don't feel like you can talk to as many people, because you need to show that strength and you don't want to show any vulnerability. And you're responsible. So your decision making is almost different, because you're not just making a decision for yourself, you're making a decision for everybody else in terms of like safety and stuff like that.
Well, I think you just did what you're supposed to do in a job interview, when you turned your weakness into your strength. And you talked about how you're you're hard on everybody, but you're also holding everyone as accountable as you hold yourself. And as you started to show out, you're only as strong as your weakest link.
That's right. I was an asshole. I was a real asshole. Like really, really, really. I was really hard on people. So it is, but you can, like somebody said to me, like, yeah, everybody knows that you care about everybody and you want to do a good job. But they're getting tired of getting yelled at. You know what I mean? So
Nope.
I definitely.
Fair enough.
Was a jerk. Yeah.
So according to the Federal Emergency Management Agency statistics, 5% of career firefighters, 11% of volunteer firefighters, and 12% of federal wildland firefighters are women. So in short, 9% of all firefighters are women. And as low as those numbers sound, they were much lower when you started out. There are stories about departments creating agility tests specifically to exclude women from the job. Did you ever experience any discrimination or barriers during your career?
You know what? I will really have to say I did not. I was very fortunate. I think part of it was that I was very determined to, like I said, not be the weak link in the chain. I worked out really hard and got really strong and fit and everything before the testing started. Like I didn't, expect the departments to change their physical agilities for, women in particular. It's like, no, if this is what the job requires, I'm going to work hard until I can pass it. Like it's up to me to be ready for these physical agilities and ready for the job. I mean, I definitely had men in the department come and talk to me and say, yeah, I don't really think women should be in the fire service. And, I have to say, I really don't blame them in their trepidation, because here they see, 5'6" me walking in, and, they're 6 feet tall, 250 pounds. Like, do they know that I am going to be able to drag them out of something? Am I going to be able to get them out of something if, something happens to them? Am I going to be able to carry most of, or as much of the weight as I should, in terms of, like, let's say we pick up a 350-pound person off the ground. Are they going to be picking up like 300 pounds and I'm only going to be able to pick up 50? And so I understand their trepidation, especially when departments lower the standards so more women can apply or more women can get hired. It's kind of, the job demands are the job demands. They don't change. Just like you can't, if you lower the height of a fence, that somebody's got to get over, it's like, well, the fences are 6 feet tall, out there in the real world. So if you lower the fences to 4 feet tall, so more women can pass, then you're really just setting them up to fail, because when they have to jump over a 6-foot fence, they're not going to be able to do it. So I'm really a firm believer in that. And when it came to the men that said, I don't believe women should be in the fire service, I would just say, well, I'm sorry you feel like that. And my determination was to show them that I could, and not just tell them that I could. I was like, well, when we go on calls and do stuff, you can, judge me then, but not right now. And I was very fortunate. I never really, I never suffered really any discrimination. And I had guys saying that, Christy's the toughest person here, and we're not worried about offending Christy. We're worried about her offending us. And so I kind of had that I'm kind of a salty person anyways, but yeah, so I really do understand, a male's trepidation, but they also have to give us a chance to be able to do the job and show that we can do the job. And the other thing too is Berkeley was really set up for people to pass and not fail. And I think that's really important, to be set up in that way, to not make people fail or not see people fail, see people do well. And we certainly didn't pass anybody who shouldn't be out there. But yeah, just setting people up to fail is just, was what some departments do. I know, especially if they're women, and that's just, they're just shooting themselves in the foot when they do that.
Yeah, you keep talking about your size being 5'6", 150 pounds. You talk about, the 6 foot, 250 firefighter. But, obviously, there's a sort of a running joke of the police officer eating donuts, 20 years into the career. I'm assuming not all firefighters were as fit as you as well. And I'm thinking that someone like you and your physical ability, you can be the first person carrying that hose at the front of the fire, as opposed to the 6 foot, 250-pound guy who's probably not going to run as fast as you.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And there is definitely that, I don't know, stereotype, you know what I mean? That the big guy is going to be better guy. And, it's like, yeah, you have, we had this big, huge, strong dude who's just, can lift 1,000,000 pounds. And he was awesome for breaking a door down. But after 5 minutes of, like work, he was he was done. He was toast. And, yeah. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right in that. And, and people will be more, you'll see departments protect the guys that can't do the job way more than they'll protect the women who can't do the job. That's definitely true.
And what advice would you give to other women who are interested in pursuing a career in firefighting, and how can they prepare themselves to overcome potential obstacles or challenges related to discrimination or bias?
Work really hard, physically work really hard, be yourself. Like, don't, if you cry and people want to give you shit, forget them, just be yourself and do the job. And, yeah, be ready to do the job. And also, like, realize 100% that you belong there, no matter what they say, because sometimes it's like, these guys like to get away, they're away from their wives and daughters, and they can just be with the dudes and do what dudes do. But it's like, this is a paid profession. This is, even if you're a volunteer, this is a professional environment. This is not, a camping trip with a bunch of dudes getting to say whatever they want. And so, you absolutely have a right to be there, but you absolutely have to be, part of the team and bring some strength to it. And, don't ever give up your tool. That's something I learned. Some guy says, give me your tool. It's like, no, don't ever give up your tool. You just do the work. And just, realize that, not that it's okay, but guys talk to each other differently. That's a really important one. Like when I first started as a paramedic, I was like, my God, these guys are like, what the hell is wrong with them? And then I just sat back and I was like, oh, they're not just talking like that to me. They talk like that to each other. That's just how these guys talk. But with that said, you know what I mean? Anything discriminatory or anything you don't feel comfortable with is not right at all. But I think I'm going around here in a circle. It's like, I guess my biggest thing is just show people you can do the job instead of telling people you can do the job, and don't ask for anything extra that anybody else wouldn't get. And you absolutely deserve to be there. So that's it. All right. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I appreciate it. So what do you see as the future of firefighting, and how do you think the profession will evolve over time, and especially for women?
That's a really good question. We used to always say, and I think it's still true, is that, the fire service is 150 years of progress completely impeded by tradition. There's so much tradition in the fire service, and I'm still not quite sure what that is, why it's holding on to tradition so much. But it very much is, and it could progress a lot more, I think, than it has, and it still has a long way to go. Construction is really changing things. So many more things are made out of plastic, and people are using OSB board instead of plywood, to build their homes, and that burns just so fast and hot. And so the older, like, interior attacks, the old real construction, was just made so much stronger than today. So firefighting has become a lot less dangerous. It's become a lot more dangerous. And so just the way we fight fire, I think, is going to eventually evolve a lot, and it won't be as like brute strength anymore. I think it'll be more about, there'll be a lot more technology in it, and that kind of stuff. It's got a ways to go, and it just keeps getting better and better. I think for women, the more women that become part of, departments in the fire service, and, move into leadership positions. And so it's changed a lot since then. You see a lot of female chiefs that departments really, the rank and file, really like and appreciate, and, look forward to their leadership. And so things are definitely changing much for the better for the women. It's like more acceptable. Like little girls are seeing that they can grow up and become firefighters too. Like when I was a kid, Johnny and Roy on Emergency 51 was my favorite thing in the world. But there's no women in there. And so it just never dawned on me like that was something I could do. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, I don't know, you see a bazillionaire on TV and you never think that's something you can do, because that's like a whole different world. And so I think seeing, little girls seeing women in the job shows them, or gives them that identity that oh yeah, I can do this job too.
Well, you read my mind a moment ago, talking about technology being a big part of it. I started doing some work with an Australian-based company that develops virtual reality training software for firefighters. How do you see the training changing as the types of fires are changing based on the materials within those fires?
That's really interesting. Because live firefighting training is really hard because it's so dangerous. And so it's really hard to add that component into it. And because that's kind of the part that gets people is, like the danger of it and being in the middle of it, and that whole adrenaline override thing that, it's like you need to be able to think and stuff, but in the midst of that, and that is so hard to recreate in training. Like they have all kinds of burn containers, and they'll do gas fires, and you'll crawl in and have to go put the gas fire out, and so that's really good for like moving hose and everything. But there's no smoke is produced, and the gas fires are so bright that you can see in a real structure fire. If you've got a house on fire and like the whole back end of the house is on fire, when you make entry, you can't see a thing. Like you cannot literally see your hand in front of your face. And that adds so much more to the problem than, just being able to move the hose through the house. And I'm really interested to see what technology will do. And I mean, this is kind of going off on a tangent, but like in the olden days, they didn't have SCBAs and they didn't have all that stuff. So they couldn't go very far into fires. And now we have, SCBAs and we have, flash hoods and all this protective equipment. So we can go really, really deep into the fire. And that's usually when we get caught in when things happen. And so it's almost like the more technology that comes out, the deeper we're going to be able to go, and the more trouble we're going to get into. And then all of that, everything is only as good as the technology, whether it works or not. When like our radios fail, and without a radio, you're kind of SOL. And for the longest time, not until like the last couple of years of my career did we get waterproof radios. The radios would short out when they got really wet, and you come out of a fire and you're soaking wet from all the water and everything. So anyways, it'll be really interesting to see, because all the training burns that I've been in, it was like boring, and because there's no danger there, there's no realism there, there's no threat, and my body and my brain was able to think very clearly because it didn't sense any danger, if that makes any sense. So yeah, that's a really interesting. I'd be really interested to see how that goes.
Now let's talk about what connected us. Let's go from fire captain Christy to author Christy. You talked about the book Flashpoint: A Firefighter's Journey Through PTSD, which chronicles your own experiences with post-traumatic stress, and again is set to be released next month. Tell us a little bit about the book, just enough to make sure everybody buys it, and what prompted you to write it.
Well, I developed PTSD, and I struggled really, really hard because I was sure that I was the only one who had it. And at my department, everyone else seemed to be doing just fine. I'm like, why am I, out of 125 firefighters, the only one that's struggling? And I thought I was weak and I was a failure, and all these just issues of shame and guilt. I was just flooded with it. And so it took me a really long time to ask for help. And I came very close to dying by suicide because I just couldn't take the shame, and I couldn't take the symptoms that PTSD are. And I really, once I got through all this on the other side, I really don't want anybody else to suffer alone. And I know when I was going through my issues, there were so many people, or I should say there was nobody I could find to talk to, or very much information I could find about it. I remember just like scouring for books. Like I just wanted to read a book on this. And the only book I found was written by Clint Marlarchuk, who was an NHL goalie who had his throat sliced by a skate, and he almost died from it. And they threw him right back on the ice like 6 days later, as soon as his stitches were healed up enough. And so I read his book, and it was the first time I ever felt like I wasn't the only one. And that feeling, like, I think saved my life. And I don't want anybody else to go through this alone. And there's so much more out there, but there still isn't enough. And there aren't enough departments out there that are doing anything about this. And I decided to write this book because I don't want anyone to feel like they're the only one, and they can see what I went through. And I tried to be very, very vulnerable and honest and forthcoming with everything I went through, so people can read it and say, oh my God, me too. Like there's somebody else out there who's gone through what I've gone through. This is how I got through it. And, I'm here to promise you that if you ask for help and stick with it, there is an amazing life on the other side. And, and I've always loved to write. I've kind of always thought of myself as a writer anyways. And then I just kind of started writing, and I was like, wow, I have a book here and I want to get this out there. So people see. And then also for the general public, they don't know what we do. And so that way they can see what we do and kind of see, the struggles that we have. And, in families or people who know first responders, they can just get a better idea of what we do and what we struggle with.
You talked about vulnerability there a moment ago. How difficult or easy was it for you to write the book?
Well, it was not difficult for me to write the book in terms of vulnerability, because I had gotten through the other side, and I've become a very vulnerable person, because that really is the key to freedom and happiness for me, at least. And, I can just be myself and not have to worry about any of that. And writing the book is hard because simply it's a lot of work. There's the editing and then the whole self-doubt, like, oh, this sounds terrible. And then the more you write it, the more you revise it, and the more you read it, the more you're like, oh my God, this is horrible. So that part of it was hard, just so much hard work and sticking with it. But the writing of itself, I actually really enjoyed the writing of itself. Like I said, I really like to write. So that part wasn't very difficult. I did have to take steps back, like take a couple months off sometimes, because I was just so inundated with PTSD and, writing about these calls that I went on at work and things that happened to me, and just the feelings that I had while I had PTSD. It's like, I just need to make sure I took good care of myself and take breaks from it. And, and I still do that now, because I have my podcast, the Firefighter Deconstructed, which is about deconstructing us and talking about our vulnerabilities and PTSD and our mental health and everything. And there's times where it's like, I just need a break from this and not be completely inundated in it. But yeah, I really enjoyed writing it for the most part.
And where can our listeners and viewers find your book when it comes out next month?
They can find it anywhere that they find books. Amazon, obviously, Barnes and Noble. So far, pretty much everywhere I've looked, you can buy it online, wherever you buy your books. Bookshop.org is a great place, because they support indie books. So yeah, it's out there. It's a regular book. It's out there. And so yeah, you can find it everywhere. I do have a website, ChristyWarren.com. You can go there and order it from there. And yeah, I'm really excited for it to come out.
And where can people find your podcast?
At Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts, that's also there. The Firefighter, it's the firefighterdeconstructed.com. Yeah, anywhere you go for. I have about 86 episodes out, and it's just me. I don't have a sound engineer or executive producer or or a coordinator or scheduler or anything. It's just me. And I basically just have first responders on, like dispatchers, firefighters, paramedics, EMTs, police officers, just kind of telling their stories. And it's really about, it's also the, like, yeah, I'm not alone. And people listen to that. And I've gotten emails and stuff from people saying, wow, I had no idea what was going on with me. And now I know, and I'm going to get some help. And like, I know I'm not the only one now. And so yeah, it's a good thing.
Remind me after the show to connect you. We have a retired Bay Area police officer on the show in a couple of weeks.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
So we'd love to connect you guys. He's a super, super guy. So we've talked about sort of the air quote, day in the life of a firefighter. And again, no typical day. What do you think of television shows like Chicago Fire? And I'm just going to pause there. I think your laugh sums it up, but I'm going to let you take it from there.
So, there's been cop shows on forever. And, you develop that, like, wow, that's what it's like. And I remember all the cops always complaining, like, no, that's not even close what it's like. And now I know how they feel, because it's not really at all how it is. In fact, a friend of mine has been posing that we do a podcast where we play a Chicago Fire episode and talk about it while it's on, just all of our laughing and our. My wife watched that show for a while, but she was not allowed to watch it around me, because the show just made me so, like, pissed off, because it's like, no, that's like not even close. That's not how we do it. That's not how it's done. I mean, yeah, it's good. I mean, I guess those shows are good just to be, it's like recognized almost as like, oh, we've made it. They made a television show about us. But yeah, that's not how it's not how it's done. It's not how it is. It's not. Yeah, it's just those shows. I mean, I don't watch them that much, so I don't really know exactly. I remember that show Rescue 911. I don't know if you remember that show with William Shatner. And that show has really made it tough on us, because everybody in that show lived. Obviously they're only going to put good stories on, but kind of give this false sense to people that, if we call 911 fast enough and they get here fast enough, everybody's going to live. And it's like, no, that's incredibly rare. You know what I mean? to bring somebody back like that. And so anyways, yeah, those shows are pretty ridiculous. I will say there's one show that's that is over, but you can still find it everywhere. It's Rescue Me by Dennis Leary. That show is tremendously realistic. It really is. It's funny because I used to watch it before I got PTSD, and I used to say, well, because it's about New York firefighters and, specifically after, kind of the aftermath of 9/11. And I remember watching it and saying, yeah, the show's really realistic, except for the ghosts that he sees all the time and the weird dreams that he has. And then it's like, I went through PTSD and I was like, nope, that part's real too. But it's really, really well done. And it's really, like they'll have fire scenes and you don't see them. You just hear something clunking around in the dark, and that's them trying to, rescue somebody out of in a house fire or something like that. And that's how it really is. So that show's very realistic. So anyways, yeah.
Thumbs up from you for that one. Duly noted.
Yes.
Did your PTS change the way you approached your job or work as a firefighter? And how do you manage triggers or stressful situations on the job?
So I got PTSD and I kept working, and I was told I had PTSD, but I thought for sure I could fix it myself and I could beat it, and I didn't need any help. And it just everything just kept getting worse. I've never been a crier unless I was really, really angry. But I never was a crier at all. And I started crying at work over nothing calls. I just had all these horrible symptoms that just continued to get worse and continued to get worse until one day I finally was like, if I don't stop going to work right now, I'll kill myself. And so that's when I finally decided to get some real help. And so I couldn't, that was the whole thing, was I couldn't manage anything anymore. And I was being triggered by everything. And every time the tones would go off at work for a call, it could be, like somebody spraining their ankle, and I would have the same physiological response to, officer been shot, or, you know what I mean? Just some horrible call. My body would have the same exact physiological response. And when I got PTSD and I took time off work, I was determined I was going to go back. But then as I started going further and further down my path of recovery and getting better and better, I realized that there's no way I could go back to work. I had no doubt that I could do my job. I could still, run into burning buildings and do everything I needed to do, but that my brain couldn't take any more hits. It's the same as, like you have a blown out knee that's been put back together, and you go back and you try to play football for a while longer, but then, just one small hit or twist in your knee and you're going to be completely done. And that's what I realized, that if I want to have any kind of future, then I need to stop taking those traumatic hits. And so that's why I just decided to step down. And you learn, and through your recovery and getting help, you learn to manage your triggers. And they don't I still can get triggered, but they don't take a hold of me like they used to. And I still can have a really bad nightmare, and I'll wake up and, be like, oh, that was just a bad nightmare. It doesn't take over my day. It doesn't take over my night anymore. And yeah, my brain is just, like I said, it's a physiological injury, and it's just, I've really given it lots of time to heal, and it's just healed a lot.
That's great to hear. I've seen statistics that indicate 70% of firefighters and EMS personnel have symptoms of depression, while 92% of surveyed firefighters said stigma was a reason that they were unwilling to get help. What do you make of those numbers? Too high, too low, just about right?
They're horrible. The numbers are absolutely about right. And, but it just breaks my heart. We are more likely to die by suicide than in the line of duty. And that's atrocious. And the majority of it's because of the stigma. I really truly believe that the majority, I have no data for this, but I would say 99% of first responders who die by suicide don't actually want to die. They just want the pain to stop. They just want all the stuff in their head to stop, and the physiological feelings to stop. And the reason why they don't stop is because they're afraid to ask for help, because they're afraid of looking vulnerable and weak. And they see, this physiological response as an emotional weakness. And so they're afraid to ask for help, because we are so ingrained that we are the helpers. We are the problem solvers. We are the strong ones. We we take the hits and save everybody else. We stay awake for 48 hours to help people, and we are the ones that are supposed to be the strong ones, and it's just because we don't want to ask for help. And if we can get rid of that stigma that asking for help takes a ton more guts and strength than not asking for help, that if people would only realize that, and so that's one reason why. I mean, there's a part of me who'd like to never talk about PTSD again and just get on with my life, but I just can't stand these numbers. It breaks my heart that anybody should die by suicide or anybody should struggle, and anybody's family should struggle, and the kids are so affected and spouses are so affected. And it's like, if we would just talk about this and get rid of that stigma, then, there's no stigma with, blowing your knee out at work and having to ask to go to the doctor and have surgery and take care of your knee. There's no stigma in that. So why is there a stigma with asking for help when your brain gets injured? It just breaks my heart. It really does.
You and me both, and that's why we have great people like yourself on here helping get that word out. So, Christy, we have just a few minutes left. I'm going to turn the microphone over to you as another professional podcaster. What's the most important message you'd like to leave with our audience today?
That you're not alone. There's so much help out there. This job, I used to always think that, all the calls that I've been on in 25 years, it's like, no, that wasn't that big a deal, because there's always somebody who had it worse. There was always a police officer out there who'd been shot, or their partner was shot and killed right in front of them, or they'd been trapped. The list goes on and on of things that I could think of where people had it worse than I did, or, they had a more legitimate reason to struggle. And that's just not the case. We tend to minimize, what we've seen, what we've done, or, you have you get physically injured in any other way. And we're always like, oh no, it's not that big a deal, but it's like, but it is a bigger deal. I look back on my career and now I say, holy crap, like I cannot believe what I've seen and what I have done. And we, even if you work for a small department and there's not a whole lot out there in terms of calls or anything, you still have seen what you have seen, and you are not alone. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of people suffering and that are going to suffer too. And you're not alone, and you're not the only one, and you need to ask for help. There's help out there, and life is so much better on the other side. I mean, I can honestly look back and say that PTSD was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it made me deal with a lot of other stuff. And I'm very happy now, and life is really, really good. You just got to ask for help.
Christy Warren, retired firefighter and author of Flashpoint, A Firefighter's Journey Through PTSD. Thank you for your service, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Chris, thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for doing your podcast too, and helping people. Yeah, you're helping people so much, so I can't thank you enough for doing this, having me on. I appreciate it.
Again, you find her book at ChristyEWarren.com. That's Christy with a CH, ewarren.com. I'm Chris Meek. Run out of time. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Until then, stay safe and keep taking your next steps forward.